All right, Jason. We teased this a little earlier. It's time to dive into it. But when you look at the Eastern Conference, if you look at the standings right now, the Cavs have a big lead over the Boston Celtics, who lost last night to the Oklahoma City Thunder. They're up to an 8.5 game lead for the 1 seed in the East. They essentially have clinched it. ESPN Analytics give them a 99.9% chance of clinching the 1 seed in the East. The fight for the overall 1 seed in the league, the Cavs have that would be a 1.5 game lead over the Oklahoma City Thunder, correct? The Cavs at 55-10, the Thunder at 54-12. But we'll focus on the East for this right now, Jason. Milwaukee's been hotter of late, even though the Cavs beat them last weekend. The Knicks won on a buzzer beater last night against Portland, but they're without Jalen Brunson for the next at least week and a half. You have the Blazers. I'm not the Blazers. You have the Pistons, who have been red hot the last month and a half under JB Bickerstaff. You have the Pacers, who are still in that 4-seed conversation. You have the teams in the play-in, which leave a lot to be desired. Jason, is the East right now really just Cleveland and Boston, or is there another team outside of the Celtics that you think could give the Cavs a legitimate threat in a 7-game playoff series?
I'm going to listen, before I say this, I think the Cavs win, okay? But I do think Milwaukee, I wouldn't be shocked if Milwaukee beats them, and you and I disagree on that. You don't think Milwaukee can guard them, and you very well might be right. But I just look at the regular season as the Bucks are bored. Once you win that championship, man, once you drink the champagne, January, February, and March don't matter, man. It just doesn't matter. And they still have that championship DNA. They do have the hammer and Giannis and the NBA. When you've got the best player in the series, that matters. And I look at Milwaukee as having the best player in that series, and that matters. Now, again, I think the Cavs will win. If it's a Cavs-Bucks second-round matchup, I'm going to pick the Cavs to win. But I'm not going to be terribly stunned if Milwaukee was able to get them just because of that championship pedigree that we're talking about. Other than that, no, we were talking the other day. Like I said earlier, I thought Orlando would take a leap this year. They've had so many injuries. Without Suggs and Wagner, I don't think they can beat Cleveland. Atlanta's a fun team. They're nice. They're long and athletic, which has given this Cavs team problems at times. That would be a fun first-round series because of the Hunter trade, obviously. Hunter going against his old team. But ultimately, Atlanta's too young and inexperienced. They're not going to beat Cleveland in a playoff series. It's certainly at this point, it looks like Cleveland, Boston on a collision course for the conference finals. And anything less than that would be a disappointment, I think, from either side. I want to see Boston. You know, I don't want Boston. Maybe, you know, if you're a Cavs fan, you probably want Boston to something goes weird and wrong and you lose in the first or second round. I want to see Cavs Celtics in the conference finals and slug it out and may the best team win. Indiana's given this team problems at times. I don't think, again, a 7-game series is different than a regular season game. And I don't think Indiana has the horses to beat the Cavs. They play fast. They score a lot. I don't think they have the horses to beat Cleveland in a 7-game series. And the one thing that, and we've talked about this a little bit, and I think I'm going to write about this. I'm going to the Cavs game Sunday, and I might write about this of like, you know, this is the test now for Kenny Atkinson. And we've talked about it, you know, it was JB's test. JB had never been in that position. And what do you do as a coach? And somebody mentioned, I think you mentioned Kenny made the playoffs once with the Nets, and that's fine. Okay. But this is a much different, when you have a team with championship aspirations, that's a much different spot to be in than where he was before. And how do you handle when a team spends 3 or 4 days digging in on your film and knows all of your tendencies, or even a week knowing all of your tendencies? So now it's game 6 and they know every play you're running. What do you do? What do you come up with? What do you got in your bag that they haven't seen yet? And I think Kenny's been great with some of the ATOs. That was one of the frustrations that we had with JB, was they just weren't very creative. And when you're on the road and you're down 10, they go on a run, they go on a 6-0 run and the crowd's into it and you got to get a bucket. Where are you going? What's your play that's going to get you a bucket to get everyone to sit down and be quiet and try and get yourself back into this? This is a real test for him. How does he steer a championship caliber roster through the playoffs? He's never done it before. And so that's one of the things I'm fascinated to watch. JB struggled with it at times. I don't think there's any question about that. I gave him a break the first year because they just didn't have, the roster wasn't ready for the Knicks. They just weren't deep enough. And then, you know, we know what happened last year and they had some injuries at the end and it was unfortunate. And I think we knew by the end of the season, he was going to be gone. And now it's Kenny's turn to sort of steer that boat for the first time. And so I'm really curious to see that and how he matches up again. If there's another veteran coach out there, like a Tibbs, but I don't think the Knicks can compete with the Cavs. I think that they're unraveling a little bit. That's certainly, I think you and I would have had a different conversation about the Knicks in October than we are right now. But the reality is I just don't think they're a team that can hang with the Cavs. So outside of Milwaukee, I don't think anybody else besides Boston can really be a threat to this team.
Milwaukee has Giannis, so they deserve at least some benefit of the doubt, considering he is a top 3 player in the world, would certainly be the best player in a series against Cleveland. However, we talked about this when they played on Friday. I don't think Milwaukee has anywhere near enough guys to guard Darius, Donovan, and Ty Jerome.
You could be right.
They can't keep those guys out of the paint, and Giannis may win a game or two by himself. But over the course of a 7-game series, I just think the overall depth of Cleveland and their ability to score at will would overcome what Milwaukee can do. We saw in that game on Friday, no one scored over 20 points for Cleveland. Nobody. 19, Max Strus was their leading scorer. They got contributions up and down the board, and Dame and Giannis had 50-plus combined, and they still lost by 12, and it was never really close for the final 6 minutes of the fourth quarter. So I don't think that's a great matchup for Milwaukee. When I look at the big picture in the East, it's Cleveland, it's Boston, and it's everyone else. And I do think because of what Cleveland can do offensively, which I'm going to touch on in 1 second, New York, I just don't think can keep up. Indiana, for a game or two, sure, but if they're not shooting 42% from 3.
Cavs aren't sweeping Indiana. Pacers would get them once, maybe twice, but they're not winning the series.
Yeah, and it's the playoffs. And Rick Carlisle is a hell of a coach.
Yep.
Made the Eastern Conference Finals last year. They have more playoff success on their resume than Cleveland does, frankly. Like, Halliburton has an Eastern Conference Finals appearance. Donovan's never made it out of the second round. Like, they do have to prove they can do that.
Yep.
However, what I think the hammer is for this Cavs team, Jason, and I was watching a ton of game footage, and I was going back and trying to find, I did a breakdown on Darius yesterday from the game again Tuesday against the Nets, and I went back to the Bulls game, and I went back to the Miami game and tried to figure out why the offense had slowed down early. And I'm not sure this is the right answer, but this was something I picked up on over the last couple of weeks. The Cavs are in the top 5 in the NBA in paint touches. And they're in the top 5 in the league in paint touches from their guards. Donovan and Darius do an incredible job getting past their defenders, getting a foot in the paint, and then making the right decision. Cleveland wants to. They don't always, but their goal on every offensive possession is to attack a rotation. Get in the paint, force the defense to rotate, find the open guy, and then he's attacking the rotation. Defenses can stay in front of you. They can help. They can collapse. They can muck stuff up if they're in their normal positions. But once you get in rotation, it's incredibly hard to help off rotations. Why? Because you're already moving to get to a spot to recover for the guy that already moved. And now as you're moving in one direction, the ball's coming back against the grain. And then you have to make a split-second decision on what you do. That is the Cavs. If you strip down their offense to its most basic principle, it is get a foot in the paint, kick it out, and attack a rotation. That leads to a bunch of threes. That leads to a bunch of drives. It leads to a bunch of drives and dump-offs. That is at its most basic form, the Cavs offensive principle, Jason. And in the start of the last couple of games, when they've gotten off to these slower starts, whether it be because Donovan didn't play on Tuesday and they had no Ty Jerome, whether it be because teams picked them up full court like Portland did 2 Sundays ago, they hadn't been getting to the paint as frequently as I think Kenny would like them to. And in a 7-game series, when you assume health, and let's figure for this conversation that everyone's healthy and playing, Donovan, Darius, Ty, DeAndre, whoever's on the court, they know that. And there's no throwaway possessions in a playoff game. You get 1 or 2 bad shots here and there. That's the nature of basketball. But when they continue to get a foot in the paint and attack closeouts, you mentioned the Budenholzer. How do you stop this? Well, when you have 4 or 5 guys that can shoot in the court and 4 or 5 guys that are playmakers off the dribble and 4 or 5 guys that can make the right decision 75% of the time or better, it's impossible to be in the right position on a second or third rotation. And the unselfishness with this, which this Cavs team plays with puts defenders in an impossible decision. Do I give the open layup or do I spread out and help on the 3? Well, I can't give up an open layup, but he's a 39% three-point shooter from the corner, and he's a 44% three-point shooter on catch and shoots from the corner. 3's more than 2. What do I do? And I think that's their trump card. And I think, Jason, when you and I have talked off the record on this show on UCSS about what makes this Cavs team special, they generate open looks and easier shots than almost any team in basketball.
Yeah.
And I told you when they played the Knicks, you weren't at that game, but I texted and I was go, damn, they're getting whatever they want. And New York can't generate good looks. Like just the difference in which Cleveland got quality shots to how New York or Milwaukee generates quality shots throughout the course of a 48-minute game, it's a night and day difference. And I think that at the end of the day is what's going to allow Cleveland to not run through the playoffs, but to have tremendous success in the playoffs. And Boston's the one team, because of how they switch, that makes you play their style more than any other team. That presents the biggest challenge in the East. OKC, different story there in the West. We'll get to them in the finals. But in the East, I'm not sure how any team outside of Boston has the horses to switch and make Cleveland play the offense they want them to play, as opposed to doing what Kenny Atkinson wants them to do.
That was a great breakdown. I can't disagree with any of it. I'm still going to say Milwaukee could beat them, but I would pick the Cavs. And it's really just based on experience and pedigree. But I think ultimately the thing with the playoffs is you're going to have a bad, because we were talking on the show earlier, like, how do you beat the Cavs? A couple months ago, I think we had a conversation, and like, there's nights where you're just not going to make shots. Mm-hmm. And there'll be nights in the playoffs where you just don't make shots. But it's hard to see this team going 4 games without making enough shots and getting enough stops to win against anybody outside Boston in the East. Take Boston out of the conversation. It's hard to even Milwaukee. It's hard to see a team that they're 4 times now they're going to not be able to generate looks. They're not going to be able to get creative offensively. They're not going to be able to drive past swing to the open man and make enough shots to win. So it's fun, man. It's a fun time of year. It's fun to see this team not letting up at this point, because a lot of times at this point of the season, it's sort of the dog days of the season. Guys get bored. Teams get bored. I've seen some really bad Cavs losses in March, at the end of March, and everybody panics and says, this is back during the championship era, and oh my God, here we go again. They're unraveling. No, they're just bored. They'll be fine by April 15th when the playoffs start. And this team, because they're young, because they haven't won anything yet, because Donovan keeps reminding them of that, because Donovan hasn't had a ton of playoff success. He's not, this is on him too. And being the guy who gets over the hump for himself. And, I had a conversation with him about that a few weeks ago, about like, he's at that point in his career where he has got to win. And he knows that. Like, he's got all the money. He's got all the all-star games. He's got all the all-NBAs, the contracts, all that stuff. Now it's time to win. He has to win. And he knows that. And I think that is what is driving this team to not let off the gas, because LeBron had the attitude of, just get me in, man. It doesn't matter. Regular season doesn't matter. I'll be the 8th seed and we'll go to the finals. Mm-hmm. And this team obviously hasn't had that success and is not built that way. This team is very much still on the Autobahn in Germany, going 110 down the freeway because they feel like they've got something to prove, and they do.
I think the one way you can kind of not stop the Cavs, but get them out of their rhythm, and we've seen Indiana do it. We saw Houston do it. We've seen OKC do it. The Nets tried to do it on Tuesday, was pressure them full court, be physical, make the refs blow their whistle. The refs aren't going to call everything. Trust me. We know that. And they may call one early, but Chris Paul used to swipe and hack every single play. Yeah. And you just knew the refs weren't going to call. He may pick up 1 or 2 fouls throughout the course of the game, but 80% of the times that he would smack your wrist was going unwhistled. And we saw Brooklyn do it pretty successfully in the first half. Granted, no Donovan, no Ty Jerome. But if you get physical with them, you make them take the ball up 94 feet against pressure. By the time they get across half court, by the time they are ready to start their drives to try and get that foot in the paint we mentioned earlier, you're 1 percentage point lower in the energy department. And that half step difference, maybe being just a split second slower, could be the difference in a defender cutting off the drive as opposed to getting beat, and then that rotation happening, and then the Cavs are at their absolute best. So I think that's the one thing you can look at as we get ready to head towards the playoffs is, how do teams use that against Cleveland, and what's Cleveland's counter come playoff time? But other than that, Jason, I'm not anointing the Cavs Eastern Conference champions by any means. Yeah. But it is them, Boston, in my mind, and then there's a significant drop-off between everyone else in the conference. If it's not a Cleveland-Boston Eastern Conference Finals, I frankly will be severely disappointed. If Orlando is healthy, I think Orlando could cause a lot of problems for this team. If the Knicks should be able to cause a lot of problems for this team. We saw it a couple years ago, but something is wrong with that team this year.
And I haven't watched them every night. I'm not around. I don't know what it is, but there's something off with that team. And I don't know if this is just the Tibbs effect where guys are just grinding down and he's wearing them out. But whatever it is, they should be able to compete with the Cavs, but they're not going to. I don't think they're going to, if that makes sense. So I'm kind of with you. Like it's Boston and Cleveland and then possibly Milwaukee. And I don't think there's anybody else.